Yo, what up, everybody? It's your boy Carson Fox with another edition of Fox on West Virginia Mountaineer Sports. And I like to talk about West Virginia sports, and I will tangle West Virginia into what I'm about to talk about. But I want to step back and look a little bit more big picture, talk about my favorite sport that goes national, college football. And what I'll title this is The Way Forward for College Football, because I think that this is an imperative inflection point for the future of college football. Now, some of the recent happenings that I'll say that will go back really 4 years since the COVID-19 pandemic, then the evolution of the transfer portal, NIL, now into its new iteration of what's coming with the realignment of the SEC, the Big Ten, the falling apart of the Pac 12, and now the unstable grounds that the Atlantic Coast Conference, ACC, sees itself on, that this is a slippery slope of where college football is heading. And for the people who are in, the P2 now and Notre Dame, they might not see this as necessarily an inflection point. And we know that these two conferences make up some of the biggest brands of college football. So that's not to say that for them, they see anything wrong with the way things are going. They're in the driver's seat. They're secure. They're feeling comfortable. No big deal. But what I'm trying to tell you, and this is as a program who's kind of on the outside looking in, outside of the P2 in West Virginia, and, kind of always have throughout their history, I will say if we're heading toward what's going of the likes of Major League Baseball, in which the haves, they're the havest of haves and the have-nots, and the way that college athletics are so much different than the appetite for professional athletics, and that college football has more to realize and more potential to maximize on if it goes the route kind of in the way that I'm saying it can go, and what I'll present to you in this show, than the way that they are going considerably right now. And I wanted to really talk about this during the news of the last month, when the leaders who were part of the College Football Playoff Committee and agreeing to a new agreement from 2026 to 2031, and that agreement being signed, in which really the SEC and the Big Ten told the Big 12, ACC, and the G5 teams really to bend the knee by pitching this format in which they were going to get multiple buys, or more playoff automatic qualifying spots, but instead really what their play was is they wanted to get more money for each of their two conferences from the college football playoff revenue sharing. And Notre Dame also made out on this deal too, not as well as the SEC and the Big Ten, but still finding a way that they can keep their independence as this playoff expands also to 14 teams from 12 teams. So I have a lot of questions really for Jim Phillips and Brett Yormark, and if I'm a school, I think this kind of went under the radar of why they didn't have to answer, and Brett Yormark, and also all the presidents, including Gordon Gee of West Virginia, who, with all the other presidents, are part of the Big 12 schools, authorized their commissioners to represent them and make the decision on their behalf. So, by doing so, have now signed it over to Brett Yormark, who made this decision. So really, rather than having the four-course meal like the SEC is going to have, the SEC and Big Ten, the Big 12, the ACC, and the G5 would really settle for the appetizer, being afraid that the SEC and the Big Ten were going to pull away, create their own type of national college football playoff format, and we would be expediting a process that I feel like that the cord could really just be cut now. And I think that there could be a path forward for the majority of teams that are already compromising these two conferences, the SEC and the Big Ten, but also some schools who are within already the ACC and the Big 12 to be a part of it. And the line that's going to be drawn into the sand is going to be a tough one that's going to change the course of college football history as we know it. But what I'm just saying right now is I can't see a college football future in which schools like a Florida State, a Clemson, a Virginia Tech, a West Virginia, even University of Pittsburgh, but teams like who have been really successful over the last 20 years in Utah or Oklahoma State, and not being in this league that is going to keep the national sport alive. And I get it that the cream is rising to the crop, taking more of like an NFL format type of look, and that's what I'll present to you today in this show. But it's still, if like we take away anything from what we've seen out of North Carolina State this year, and you have countless examples in basketball, is the essence of what makes college athletics is what's so great are those crazy Saturdays or like the NCAA tournament where you see the kind of upsets that you see. Why I still feel like 2007 captures the day and age of the golden age of college athletics a whole lot more than 2023 and what's going into next year with 2024, even with this expanded playoff. Now, the ratings of when Clemson and Alabama were matching up in the national championships, three times or something out of a 4 year span. It just seemed like, oh, that's what we were coming to. I get it, the TV ratings and teams or fans want to see the best two teams play for a national championship, and that's what's going to rate. That's what's going to sell on TV. So good for the TV production companies, good for the bettors who are driving the TV ratings that we have seen over these last couple of years as sports betting goes national. And that's what really I think is driving this, is masquerading and covering over all of the ills that are happening to many different sports leagues, professionally and collegiately. So while that's masking that over, but still, we know, and I feel like at our core of core, it's the Saturdays when an Appalachian State beats, now I messed that pronunciation, State beats a Michigan, or all the chaos that ensued at the end of the regular season in 2007. Like, that's what makes college sports so great, is that you have these teams from all over the country who have their own different personalities, with their fan bases who have their own different cultures, who meet up in close proximity. So there's bragging rights between people in Pullman, Washington, and Seattle, Washington. There's Auburn and Tuscaloosa, Alabama, Columbus, Ohio, and Ann Arbor, Michigan. Like, I know those are some bigger profile rivalries, but it's even the sub ones, like I'm saying, the backyard brawl between West Virginia and Pitt. That's what makes college football so great, is protecting those rivalries and keeping but preserving the number of teams to still have that national appeal. But still, I get it that there's about 14, 15 schools, maybe even upwards of 20 right now, if you take the best of the best, the biggest of the biggest from the SEC, from the Big Ten, a couple who are in the ACC right now, and put them in a league of their own to create that kind of super league. That's not going to appeal. If you're alienating 75% of or 50% of college football, and really fans nationwide, and just relying on that 50% plus bettors to hold you over, I'm telling you, there's a happy medium where you can get more, and that's what I want to draw out for you. And why I think this is an relevant time as any is because we have two different cars who are that are going to collide, both in the court system and what's happening with like TV, with the conferences and realignment and so on, that are going to crash. I feel like within the next 12 months, that this is an opportunity. I feel like that once that crash happens, that we can have a way forward that is going to work out in the best possible case scenario. Now, here's the thing. What would be the best way forward for college football is good for some and not good for others. And who I mean by that is we need to stop looking at the world from the traditional terms of conferences. So the conference leadership. the conference championship games, the teams who are already making up these conferences, who are really the drag, and we all know it, are the dregs of their conferences, but because of either history, their market that they're in for television ratings, so on and so forth, they don't belong. So that if we want to have the best of the best, as many as possible teams playing against each other in one, we have to look at it by divisions, that we can still keep, as I'm going to present, 80 teams of the current FBS who are competing before a Division One and a Division Two championship. Now, Division Two is not going to draw the same kind of TV dollars. It's a similar prospects of the way that we currently have it, up until just these past pre-2020, the way that there really was a divide between the P5 and the G5. And the national narrative of the differences between what is now P4 and now the G5, G6, if you want to include the Pac-2 of Oregon State and Washington State, that's overrated. That doesn't even need to be a talking point. Like, why there's so much of an emphasis on that is, no, there is a real stark division currently drawing out of the P2 and everyone else. So if you don't want if you want college football to turn away, its eyes, like I said, only have its eyes set on those right now teams that are part of the SEC and Big Ten, I think they need to expand. But again, I would leave it away. So let me just talk about those two cars that are headed down the highway at the same time. So we all know that because of the new Fox and ESPN television contracts with the SEC and Big Ten respectively, that few schools, the most outspoken one being Florida State, second most outspoken being Clemson, and kind of on the fringes, seeing what's happening and how it's going to play out in North Carolina, want to leave the ACC. And there's 6 teams, or 4 teams, the Magnificent 7 or Magnificent 8, Hateful 8, however, at ACC meetings last summer, who are right along on the coattails of wanting to follow these schools out of the ACC because of its terrible television contract with ESPN, but can't break away. So it's only a matter of time before Florida State and or Clemson figure out some way to break this grant of rights, or ESPN, make its case known up to the leaders at ESPN to find some sort of a way. And I don't know what their play is, either to get to the Big Ten or to the SEC, but that's really what's going on, is those 3 teams, and perhaps more, are trying to implode the ACC. And when that happens, it will have huge, drastic effects that I feel like is the next huge domino, alongside with whatever Notre Dame might do if and when that happens, and the realignment of the Big Ten and the SEC. And that's when we're going to be set. I feel like that's when we're going to have the future of what is NCAA President Charlie Baker said a few months ago is the new Division I, because it's coinciding, going back to, again, my 2 race cars down the strip analogy here, is that Dartmouth men's basketball, if you've been keeping up with the news, in its legal battle with the assistance of the National Labor Relations Board against Dartmouth University, and that this court case could potentially go all the way up to the Supreme Court, in which they are arguing that they don't care, to cut off your nose to spite your face, that collegiate athletes, the NIL model of pay for play and the donor fatigue that's a part of it, but they're going from looking at it from a legal standard as, do they meet the agency test of whether they are truly athletes, which could then pave the way for universities to pay directly student athletes, not quasi through the back door through these NIL collectives, which fans like myself and others are really fronting the bill. No, a school like West Virginia University would pay its student athletes directly to participate. And if that goes across the board nationally, from Division I to Division III down, that changes everything. that I think that who it's going to affect even the hardest, more so than these Division Ones or Division Twos, or I mean, are the Division Threes and the Division Twos, which we could potentially be looking at, say, a club sports model in which the NCAA or another outside organization is really just governing the championships, putting together the schedules, just and really for the most part, all pretty much D3 schools, and I think only maybe all or maybe some don't in Division Two offer athletic scholarships. So really, it's just like kind of not necessarily changing the way in which the sport is presented per se, but it would be a way to legally get around. And this is all hypothetical, but schools having to pay the athletes, in which case at like a Division 3 school, athletics drives enrollment, and that's the reason that you have athletics, not the other way around. At the highest of the high Division 1 level is, and yes, athletics does drive enrollment at the D1 level too, don't get me wrong, but when you're paying full scholarships and you're paying athletes to be there, you're trying in an effort to win championships, to keep continuing to reap the rewards of these multi-million-dollar television contracts and so on and so forth. So everything that's going on with Dartmouth is going to impact everybody. Also, the House case. I won't get necessarily into the details. You can listen to some other podcasters about that, but this is one I don't think has. I mean, the way in which these court cases have been going, and that the former athletes or current athletes are winning every single court case, who knows? But I just don't know how you can realistically pay back all student athletes to the year of 2016 what they would think of fair market value for their name, image, and likeness, that these schools and the NCAA are on the hook for that. It's like, okay, yes, NIL became legal July 1st, 2021. How are you just stopping at 2016? Why don't we do every living former student athlete across all sports? So that House case is really going to open up Pandora's box, and if it gets approved, and I'm saying the case of the Oregon beach volleyball case, another one out there in which it all depends upon Title IX, that these female athletes arguing that the male sports student athletes are getting preferential treatment in terms of NIL, and that's exactly why we have NIL the way that we do, is before predominantly college football, small percentage men's basketball, and it's all the Olympic sports who are second to third to fourth tier in the women's sports. Now, sports like baseball, women's basketball, for example, it's women's softball lesser than women's basketball even. But these sports that are predominantly getting on the networks on television, yes, they're getting some NIL compensation, better than they have, last year, the year before, so on and so forth. But it's still not to the extent that football is. And that's where you hear the comments from leaders like Jim Phillips out at the ACC, is that because of Title IX, you're going to lose at the Division 1, Power 4 level. You're going to lose sports. You're going to just have to have enough female sports to coincide with as many men's sports that are revenue driving sports that you want to have to keep around, to stay in compliance with Title IX. So it's ugly. And I think that's why Charlie Baker, NCAA president, threw out that memo these past few months about a $30,000 per student athlete base floor that these schools would have to then, and I did the math for you in one of my previous episodes, of how much money, realistically, $15 million a year that West Virginia University would have to foot the bill at that $30,000 dollars per student limit. Base floor again, and then it's like what I've been arguing on Twitter is, okay, so all these schools have to have this base floor. Then is it going to turn into collectives stick around and to pay certain players a higher percentage than like again, so if you have a Caleb Williams at USC and he got paid way much more than $30,000 in name, image, and likeness through USC's NIL collective. So are the collectives going to make up the difference in fair market value for those men's football players, men's basketball players, but the university is still on the hook for a number that complies within Title IX. That's the way I could see it moving forward, that collectives are here to stay, not going anywhere. Donors, fans are going to be on the hook for this, as well as the universities to pay these athletes. So that's just to get in the door. So the SEC, the Big Ten, are obviously, because of these new television contracts with the financial ramifications that come with them, the payouts from the college football playoff, and their deal with its deal with ESPN, they're going to be able to financially adapt to change faster. If this goes through, and because they have more money, they have a jump start on employee compensation to their student athletes, may be able to keep around. Like they're in a good place because of what's happening with this. But there will be some teams who can shoulder it, and what I would say was who will make themselves viable for realignment. Now that's what's going to be the curious case for me. So as the ACC falls apart, and if it coincides with what happens with Dartmouth, what happens with the House case, that the SEC and the Big Ten, the biggest two questions that I see facing those two leagues, who will then form the Division I, is to how many teams do they want to expand to? Is it equal? And of course, naturally, then who are the teams that get taken? And, if you listen to the rhetoric of Greg Sankey for the last 12 months, not wanting to give anything away, playing cards, he is the shark of all sharks, him and Tony Petitti in the Big Ten, but I think Sankey's even more so because he has the background in more of a background in collegiate athletics than Tony Petitti, saying the SEC doesn't want to expand. We want to stay at 16 teams. Come on. As what's happened this past year, it was just I feel like because of a geographical fit that the SEC Southeastern Conference didn't want to take a team from Seattle, Washington, or Eugene, Oregon to join its league, but the Big Ten said, you're a northern school. We've split the country really in half, and we're going to take pretty much everybody south in the SEC. Kentucky, Tennessee, Missouri, across all the way down past Texas, and then everybody north of that is going to be a part of the Big Ten, and that's the way it's likened. But what I will say, how many number of teams does it want to expand to, and then how will those teams be chosen? Are they going to choose it based upon a combination of many things, enrollment, and how schools will stay financially afloat through this time in which, again, it's paying now hundreds of student athletes or fewer, who knows, to compete there, but on a 30,000 plus, or give or take, per year basis for all of its student athletes. Its alumni base and how they're able to support back to the university. Its market size, where you're geographically located, and how that impacts the television revenues by just sheer number of eyeballs in your market. And your endowment. I mean, there are schools on this list like a Stanford, like Duke. Like, how can you see those kinds of schools who have those types of, billions of dollars in their endowments get left out in the new world at least of college football? That will be, a downward slope, that once it happens to football will happen to basketball, will happen to baseball, will happen to other sports. So and then athletics budget. I mean, a school like West Virginia, who sits at $105 million in athletics department revenue, is not in the same ballpark as Ohio State at number one at $250 million. So add on these new funds that are coming from the TV networks and so on and so forth. But they're right on the cusp. That's what I feel like. I feel like West Virginia is right on the cusp of still being within a conference with a team like Ohio State, who can still compete on the field for a 3-hour, 4-hour football contest. May not win, but it can still compete because the talent level isn't just far enough to the point that it's like, okay, Ohio State playing Akron or Ohio State playing Kent State, for example. Like, that's the difference to me. So if you keep everybody in the same league, I don't know, with different revenue sharing, teams getting, some teams preferential treatment, like the Big 12 model previously with Texas. I don't know how that could potentially work. I'm not going to get into that for this show, but you get what I'm saying. There's a cutoff, I feel like, of right around 40 teams. 40 teams, 2 divisions. Within it, we'll keep 2 conferences, and those aren't really necessarily from any sort of a ideological standpoint or anything with a TV standpoint, but I think we need to be talking about one sport, college football, and we're talking about 2 divisions that govern within college football of 40 teams each. And again, you're going to see a stark difference between the teams who are a part of Division 1 versus Division 2. But I still think with the right television partners for Division 2, when we're playing for a national championship, and a relegation model, which I don't want to get into for this show because it's going to be long enough, but for it, you can still have that national appeal, that national flavor, keep all of those things that I'm talking about while being able to logistically do it. So I'm beating around the bush for 26 minutes already. Let's get into how and we got to start out with the schedules, because that's what everybody always talks about. It's like, how are you going to do it predominantly still in the fall, not make these players play that many more games that it's exorbitant, but still satisfy all these needs. So talking about a schedule, here's how I think it could work. You start same time. You start over Labor Day weekend. So for the year 2024, and this is what I'm using for this show, you start week 1, August 31st. And you have all the way until November 30th, that would be week 14, to play 12 games. So you really have quasi 2 bye weeks within that, within those 14 weeks to play 12. So players talk about the physical ramifications of a long season that puts on your body mentally, and the travel that goes within, again, traveling from a Piscataway, New Jersey, all the way to a Los Angeles, California. So that way, within 14 weeks, you can have 2 different bye weeks and still play 12 games. So then, boom, I don't buy the argument about bye weeks going into the playoffs. I don't think there's any and like college football, it just seems like Army-Navy week. You might be an Army-Navy game fan, and like I'll watch it because it's on, but it's a boring game where there's no need for us to like take that break from the end of the regular season into jumping right into the playoffs like the NFL does with wild card weekend. So there we go, December 7th. So again, for all but the teams that make the playoffs, your season's done by November 30th, just along the same lines as they are already. But if you make the conference playoffs, you're going starting December 7th. That is an on-campus playoff game. So it gives you an incentive to get into the conference playoffs, be a higher seed to be getting the on-campus revenue of a playoff game. Same difference with week 2. That of a conference playoff can be an on-campus game. So again, that's 14 games max, potentially with 2 additional home games to play on campus. And then the third week, having a conference championship game at select locations to be determined, however the conference would want to do it. So you're still getting that conference revenue, which you can think of as like in the NFL, the AFC championship game, NFC championship game. You can build it up. Then go on a bye week. That would be December 28th. And then you can still, within 10 days worth of preparation for a national championship game, only 2 teams who would be playing their then 16th game, similarly to like college football now, similarly to like to the NFL. You can finish up the national championship by January 1st, open the transfer portal however you want to do it, get on to NFL training and preparation for the draft of what these players want to do, so on and so forth. But there you go. So you can have 2 weeks of playoff games on campus, have a conference championship game in select locations, so still have that buy-in from the conference, have a bye in between, and have a national championship game. So I say two 20-team conferences all within one league of a Division 1 and Division 2. Um, Within those 20-team conferences, I'm going 4 divisions of 5 teams each. So by doing so, it can equate to you play 4 division games every single year annually against those 4 core opponents. You can play 3 non-division conference games against teams who are a part of your league that you play on a rotational basis. You play 4 non-conference games across your same league. So you're playing one of each there to keep that national appeal, and then you can play 1 game of Division 1 versus Division 2 to still keep some sort of rivalries protected between some teams who might not be playing across, or just want to get into different recruiting territories and stuff like that. So it makes for a much more difficult schedule, don't get me wrong, but again, if you're having this stark drastic change of the top 40 teams across college football making it in this League One, that's the kind of schedule you're going to have to play week in and week out. So the way I see it, top 6 best records in each conference make conference playoffs, and the tiebreaker being the division record. I didn't get too much further down the line with second tiebreakers, third tiebreakers, so on and so forth. But it doesn't matter about your in-division record like the NFL does. It matters more about your conference record. So when I talk about the teams within the 2 divisions, and you can see what I'm saying, you could have 3 teams potentially out of 1 division all making the top 6 best records in the league. And there might not be a team from 1 division based upon how they perform. So, you could have 2. It could all really necessarily depend upon how the performance goes. So it's not like, oh man, if you get stuck in one murderer's row division, division, that you're necessarily like screwed ultimately. Kind of like how we see annually with the Big Ten East and the SEC West, is there's just so much competition that it's like the Big Ten West or some of the ACC Coastal. You get these average to above average teams maybe that get in but then get blown out versus that other opponent. So that's what I say. I won't go through it again. You get what I'm trying to say here with the playoff structure, who gets in, how many games they play for the regular season, which matters most, I feel like, for the TV networks, and we see that in the revenue distribution for those TV regular season deals between the leagues. So let's get into the teams themselves. So Division 1 division I stack of 5 teams. I wish I had like a graphic, but again, low budget the way I do these videos, so just bear with me as I rattle these off for you. But I'd love to show you graphically how I do this. Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, Michigan State, Notre Dame, all within 1 division. That's arguably the toughest division that I've drawn up, but how great would that be that you keep all of those rivalries between those 5 teams intact, playing each other every single year. Those 4 games amongst those 5 schools. Now, again, they're going to play 1 team from each of these other divisions, and then they're going to play 1 game across the divisions in the other side of the league. So, again, there's an opportunity that each of those schools, or 3 of those 5 schools potentially, could make it into the top 6 with the top 6 best records. So it's not something to necessarily, I feel like, get hung up on against each other. So then move down. And this is where it's a difference, but I'm looking through the lens of a West Virginia fan. If you put Pitt, West Virginia, Maryland, Kentucky, and Virginia Tech all in 1 cluster, 1 division. Moving on, Tennessee, North Carolina State, Clemson, and South Carolina. And then Florida, Florida State, Miami, Georgia, and Georgia Tech are all a part of 1 division. So that would be more so, I would say, your East versus West of what I can see in Division 1. Division 2 is going to be North versus South. So for Division 1, East versus West. So that is your Eastern Conference. Or excuse me, I'm sorry. Eastern Yes, Eastern Conference within Division One of all those 20 schools that I just listed. So then the Western Conference of Division One, I have Wisconsin, Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, and Missouri all playing within a division. USC, UCLA, Oregon, Washington, and Utah all within a division. Texas, Texas A&M, Texas Tech, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma State all within a division. And Arkansas, LSU, Ole Miss, Alabama, and Auburn all within a division. So that is your Western Conference of Division One. So those 20 teams, or 40 teams, 20 teams trying to make it out for 12, 40 teams trying to get to 12, with 6 from the East, 6 from the West, playing across 3 playoff weeks to reach a national championship game between the two. And that's the way that you would have it structured. I know there's some schools who I have a part of the West who are on the eastern side of the Mississippi, but that's kind of where I saw the line being, is clustering those teams into 5, closest proximity to keep that proximity and some rivalries protected or rivalries renewed, but also being geographically represented East versus West. So there's your Division One. Now, if you didn't hear your name a part of those schools and you're, a Big 12 fan or another team, let me talk about Division Two in a second. If you don't hear it as a part of Division Two, then I know that we're still talking about probably 53 teams-ish that are currently a part of FBS. So really, like, those teams that make that, those are teams that are all represented beyond what was the previous Pac-12, Big 12, ACC, SEC, and Big 10. So you keep the best of the best all in that league. So what do you think of that? Once again, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, Michigan State, Notre Dame, 5. Pitt, West Virginia, Maryland, Kentucky, Virginia Tech, 5. Tennessee, North Carolina State, Clemson, South Carolina, 5. Florida, Florida State, Miami, Georgia, Georgia Tech, 5. Those 20 teams make up the Eastern Conference of Division One. Wisconsin, Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, USC, UCLA, Oregon, Washington, Utah, Texas, Texas A&M, Texas Tech, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Arkansas, LSU, Ole Miss, Alabama, Auburn. Those are the 20 that would make up the Western Conference of Division One. So then you go down to Division Two. Let's have the same kind of format amongst these 40 teams, where again, now I'm going north versus south. And if we'll start with the South, we'll go with Virginia, Liberty, App State, Wake Forest, Duke. That's all one division. Memphis, Mississippi State, Tulane, UCF, USF. That's all one division. Houston, TCU, SMU, Baylor, Colorado, all one division. Arizona, Arizona State, San Diego State, Cal, Stanford, that's all one division. That's, again, is the Southern Conference, a part of Division Two. The Northern Conference being Boston College, UConn, Syracuse, Temple, Rutgers, that's all one division. Louisville, Purdue, Cincinnati, Indiana, Vanderbilt, that's all one division. Northwestern, Illinois, Minnesota, Iowa State, Kansas State, that's all one division. BYU, Washington State, Oregon State, Boise State, UNLV, that's all one division. Those last 20 teams make up your Northern Division of Division Two. So could a potential third-party candidate, such as an Amazon or an Apple, who wanted to get in on the Pac-12 negotiations last summer, does an NBC want to dabble in that? Does a Fox or ESPN on like a second tier kind of TV deal? I think there is a way. There is a way forward that still that Division Two type of slate of games could still rate well on TV, could draw fans because they want to watch college football. There's still a lot of high quality teams that I mentioned a part of that list. Like a team that I feel really really bad about is Kansas, putting on that Division II list is Kansas State. Like Kansas State has been for the good part of now about 30 years extremely competitive. Won a conference championship title game just 2 seasons ago, beating TCU in overtime. Like a team like Kansas State, I feel like should have more power to its name to be able to compete, and that's where I feel like potentially a relegation model could be. I just want to develop this structure really to make it as a part of the show. But a relegation model to potentially teams who don't perform as part of Division One, financially can't make it, so on and so forth. Can a team from a Division Two eventually play up into its way into Division One? Potentially. Or you still keep Farmageddon between Kansas State and Iowa State. You could develop some geographic rivalries with Northwestern, Illinois, Minnesota there in the Midwest. And I still think, like I said, that is highly competitive football when you can still keep Arizona State together. You can keep a SMU TCU together. You can keep Louisville. Louisville's another team that I feel really bad about potentially putting into a Division II, but doesn't draw the same in the state of Kentucky like UK does. Even though I know they hate each other. But, put them up against Purdue, Cincinnati, Indiana, Vanderbilt. You have that nice region that you could keep those games all together all the time and still have, a schedule that looks along the lines of, playing Iowa State, could be playing a BYU, and could be playing a, Boston College, all within your own conference. And with also playing one game against, say, a Wake Forest, UCF, then Colorado, and then an Arizona State. So that's a really, really good schedule too, and I'm competitive. I know it's not the likes of a Division One. So that's what I mean to say is I think I kind of have a structure. I think I kind of have the teams set. It's now up to these teams. Can they financially afford it? And again, it would take the leaders, a Greg Sankey to have less power, Tony Petitti to have less power. These schools, these biggest name schools, maybe a Texas doesn't want to share the revenue with, say, a Texas Tech, or want to have to share revenue with like a Kansas. Like that's why they wanted to, break out of the Big 12 already and get a part of the SEC. But what I'm trying to say is an SEC model in which you only have 16 teams, or 18 teams if you just decide to add, say, a Clemson and a Florida State, and then the Big Ten stays at 18 teams. Like that's not enough. And why are there teams like Rutgers in the Big Ten or Vanderbilt in the SEC who have no business being a part of Division One? Yes, they're in a Division Two, as I have laid out here. They can qualify, play football in Division II, but there's no way, shape, or form that they should be a part of a Division I when, like I said, a team like Florida State, Clemson, Utah, West Virginia, Virginia Tech currently aren't. So that's where I can see college football the best way forward, 40 teams across 2 divisions, and that's the schedule and structure that they play. So I know I gave you a lot of details. That's a lot to unpack in 45 minutes, but this is where we stand on April 2nd of the year of our Lord 2024. And right now, ESPN and Fox Sports have meddled so far into college athletics, and it's just, they are the Geppetto on the strings that are the SEC and the Big Ten, and they are their cash cows. Well, I'm telling Geppetto, if I could, slap them across the faces like, hey, there is a better way forward for you until the way, besides the way that you're designing it. And maybe it'll work its way out if that's what I'm saying is if the SEC decides to expand to 20, sorry, if the Big Ten decides to expand to 20, who do they add and then do they subtract some? Because we could get to this. We could get to this model very quickly, actually, with how how I've aligned it and how I've drawn it up. But you have to add some new teams. You got to subtract some teams. It's not as easy as like it is on NCAA 14 to just make these conferences and do all that. But then that's your way forward. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. You mad at me? You love this? What changes would you make? Love to hear in the comments here on YouTube. If you've loved this video, please hit the like button. Love to have you a subscriber. Check out the rest of my comment on my channel, all talking about West Virginia sports. So if we do have a ton of WVU fans who are tuning into this, what do you think about the Mountaineers, and is this the best way forward instead of being, what's the other option? So, or if this is all West Virginia fans tuning into this and not other fans of other teams, what do you think of that for the Mountaineers and the prospects of the future? So love to have you a subscriber, and thanks for tuning in, y'all. So let's go. Hail West Virginia.